Hello, everyone, and welcome to our meeting number 16 of Bright Garden Voices. This is the 16th meeting in our original format that we do on Zoom. We invite different people to come and discuss a certain topic, and we also have an opportunity for live engagement with the audience where you can ask your questions. Hello, everyone who is here. It's good to see some familiar faces, and let's get right to it. So I'm Arnold Alaverdian, one of the co-organizers and co-founders of this project. And Bright Garden Voices is a grassroots initiative which provides a platform for constructive dialogue between Armenians and Azerbaijanis. We host online and in-person activities where guests share their experiences and ideas relating to the Azerbaijani-Armenian conflict or any other matter relating to the two nations. So today's meeting, some of the enclaves along the Armenian-Azerbaijani border have made the news recently, seemingly a recent deal to pass control of some villages which are Azerbaijani exclaves to Azerbaijan has become a hot topic, especially in Armenia. So for this, we invited two guests who have family histories in Armenia from these exclaves along the Armenia-Azerbaijan border to share a personal perspective of their family history in this regard. So today I'm joined by Sebe, who will be co-hosting for the first time, and Leila Eminli, and we will go next to Sebe to introduce herself. Sebe, please.
Thank you, Arnold. Hello, everybody. I'm Sebe Hakopian, and I was born in Eastern Siberia, but I'm based in Yerevan now. Professionally, I'm a service delivery manager at an IT company. And my family history is tightly connected with the conflict, and because my relatives from other sides are from Karabakh, and also my grandparents used to live in Baku. Yeah, I'm really eager to contribute to the peaceful dialogue between Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Leila, please.
Thank you, Sebe, and thank you, Arnold. So I'm Leila. I was born and raised in Azerbaijan, but currently living in Germany, and I'm doing my master's. I've been with Bright Garden Voices since 3 years now. And yeah, even though I do not have a personal family history in this region, I still joined this organization to contribute to peace. Because I believe that it concerns everyone in these regions, not only those who are involved only. So yeah, I'm really excited for today's meeting. Thank you.
And Leila, yeah, let's go on with having the guests introduce themselves.
Yeah, so to start with, we are joined by today Uli Nasibova and Maria Zakarian. So who will discuss their family and relatives in regards to having lived in an enclave and their experiences. Now, firstly, I would like to kindly ask Maria to introduce, and then to Uli introduce briefly themselves before we go to the Q&A session, main session.
Okay, hello everyone. So my name is Maria. I live in Yerevan, but I am from the city Abovian, where my family also based now. I'm a visual artist. I'm a photographer. Yeah, and my family is from Artsvashen. So basically, I will share my experience about their experience. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Maria. Now back to Uli.
Hi, everyone. My name is Uli. I go by Uli in America. My name is Uli Nasibova. And my paternal grandfather is from Yukhari Askipara, which is also an enclave. And my maternal grandmother is from a nearby village called Ashahı Askipara. So there's two Askiparas, the upper and the lower. So I have a grandfather and a grandmother from both villages. And I am also here to share their stories and some of my memories as a child. And yeah, thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you to both of you. And now I believe we will go to the main session. So back to Seven.
Thank you, Leila. Our first question is to you, Uli. So would you please tell us a bit about your family history regarding Yukhari and Yukhari Askipara?
Sure. I just want to add something because it's extremely confusing, and I've had to explain this to my Azerbaijani friends. So I don't expect even Armenians to know about this, but the enclaves, the actual little islands, they haven't been exchanged, or the control hasn't been passed down yet. What's been happening in the news is actually involves the other village that my paternal grandmother's from. That is not an enclave. That's the Yukhari Askipara. So the fate of the enclaves is still up in the air. I just kind of wanted to make that little correction. But so my grandfather was born in Yukhari Askipara, and he, from what I understand, so my grandfather passed away in 1995, and unfortunately my father, who spent a lot of his childhood in those villages, also passed in 98. So I had to kind of rely on my memories and memories of my mother, who's here, and a bunch of my father's cousins who are from, specifically, I tried to focus on Yukhari Askipara because it is the enclave. We have also a lot of family from Yukhari Askipara, but my grandfather was born there, and my grandfather's father, Nasib Kishi, so my last name is Nasibova, so my great-grandfather was Nasib in Yukhari Askipara, and he was what was considered Kyoha of 6 villages. Kyoha is kind of like a local term for like a local judge. So like if there's a dispute, oh, you know, he went into my orchard and took my fruit. You know, people would come to my great-grandfather, Nasib Kishi, and he would kind of help people solve local disputes. And he wasn't just doing this for Yukhari Askipara, but in addition to 5 other villages nearby. And, you know, before the Soviet Union, these villages were part of the Russian Empire, part of the so-called Kazakh Uyezd. And what I learned from my family, that was actually kind of a surprise to me, that today's village of Askipar, the Armenian village of Askipar, which is kind of stuck between Yukhari and Yukhari Askipara. All those 3 villages, Yukhari Askipara, and then Askipar, and then Yukhari Askipara, were actually kind of one big village that had Azerbaijanis and Armenians living together, just in different parts. And then for some reason, when the Soviet Union was established, there was this like really funny division of territory. A lot of my family members are convinced that it was done intentionally. I don't know. I'm not a historian. And yeah, so as a result, there was kind of this division into 3. Yukhari Askipara, Askipar, the Armenian Askipar, and then Yukhari Askipara. So Yukhari kind of became a little island. Yukhari became part of the mainland Azerbaijani territory. And then, of course, the Armenian village in between, Askipar. But what I also learned from my family, that when they would come and grow from the village, it's not like they were border checkpoints, you know, they would go through villages, they traveled freely, they had friends on either side, you know. For example, when my mom and my dad got married, they had a very romantic honeymoon in Kazakh. my father decided to take her to his ancestral village. And, you know, they went to Askipara first, then they went to Vaskipar and looked at the old church. You know, local Azerbaijanis were proud of that church too, even though we're not Christians. And then they went to Yukhari. So my mom, you know, one of her memories was after she got married with my father, they went to Askipara and they went and looked at the church. And then in Yuhari Askipara, there's a beautiful waterfall, and it falls into kind of like this area that creates a bath, like a rock bath. And, you know, and my father said, I'm going to go swim there. And she said it was very beautiful, stuff like that. So this is just a little bit about the villages and my connection to it.
Thank you, Uli. So we'll now, Maria, would you please tell us a bit about your family history regarding Artsvashen?
So the thing is that my grandparents, they were born in Artsvashen, Tashkent, and my grandfather and great-grandmother were also born there. But before they left the village, they firstly moved to the small city Abovian. And my grandfather was working in Abovian, but they were still going to the village from time to time. And my mother and my aunts and my uncle were born in Artsvashen, but they've moved with my grandfather. But then when they became a bit older, my grandparents decided to go back to the village and live there. So they went back to the village, and in 1992, how they told me, the authorities of the village kind of told them to leave the village and told them that it will be just for 3 days, that they will be able to come back. So they didn't know, like my grandparents didn't know that they are like saying goodbye to the village. So it's like very like shocking to them. And yeah, they left the village and never went back. But yeah, but the weird thing is, I guess, that well, growing up, you know, like I've heard like a lot of stories, but I couldn't like understand exactly what they were talking about because when I was very small, you know, in Armenia, when people sometimes use like they say Turks when they talk about Azerbaijanians. And yeah, she was all like my grandmother used to say that Turks took our village, and I didn't understand what she was talking and what's happening. And for years while growing up, I couldn't understand what was that. But I remember that the strange feeling of like kind of loss that you feel as a child, but you don't really understand it, and it doesn't really concern to you because you've been born like in a completely another place, time, and you don't really have any connection to it, you can say, but also you have. And yeah, this is very interesting experience. I think that I think a lot of children and grandchildren experience from their grandparents, or people who like kind of had this experience of losing their home. So this is very interesting for me. And yeah.
Thank you all for the responses. Now going to the next question, to start with first Uli. So part of your family, as you mentioned, is from the enclave, but you weren't born there. But do you still feel that you are from those parts, and what role does the enclave play in your identity?
So in Azerbaijan, our national identity is very regional based. So the best way to explain it is, you know, people are very proud of the region or the village they're from. So when I was a child, you know, in our family, like, you know, in Baku, Baku used to be a small city, and then it grew, obviously, because of oil, but then it became the capital. So people were always curious, where are you from? Where are you from? And, you know, we Azerbaijanis, depending on which part of the country we're from, we actually tend to look a little different from each other. Maybe it's the same in Armenia, I don't know, but it's always, you know, one of the first questions that you would get, like, where are you from? And what they mean is not which country, but which region. And, you know, my identity, even though my mom is not from Kazakh, was not just Kazakh, which is of Kazakh, but my identity as a child was always Askiparalı, which is from Askipara. And in my family, we never said, you know, Yuhara Ashahu, we never did the differentiation. We did sometimes when we had to talk about the geography, but we also always talked about that we are Askiparalı. You know, Leila, you're from Kazakh, you know how Kazakh are, how people from Kazakh are very proud about being from Kazakh. But in addition to that, my grandfather, he dedicated his whole life to uplifting his area. So he was a school director of 3 different schools in the Kazakh region, and he founded one of those schools. Not only that, he was one of the first. Kazakh had this school called Kazakh Müəllimlər Seminarisi, Kazakh's Seminary of Teachers, and we're talking about 1918, like democratic Azerbaijani Democratic Republic. So right after we became independent, after the Russian Empire, there was a school founded to train people. It was kind of like, if you were to think about it in modern terms, it wasn't quite a university, but maybe it was like a college. And out of all places in Azerbaijan, it was founded in Kazakh. So people of Kazakh were always very proud of their identity, also compared to other regions. And again, I don't know, I'm just kind of telling you my memories and recollection as a child. They produced a lot of writers, there were a lot of people who tried to get education. As an example, my grandfather was born very poor in Yukhari Askipara, even though he was son of a local so-called judge, Kyoha. You know, people in villages lived in very poor conditions, but you know, he went to this Kazakh Müəllimlər Seminar, to the seminary of teachers. So he got some education, and that was very important for his family. And later when he got married, my grandmother wasn't educated. He insisted that my grandmother finish that seminary. And then he insisted that her 2 sisters went to the seminary. And then that was kind of like his lifelong mission to bring more education to that entire region, to Kazakh. Like I said, he was a school principal for 55 years. He founded one of the 3 schools. My grandmother was a school teacher her entire life. And I have an uncle, a paternal uncle. He actually became a writer. His name is Vagif Nesib. He still is alive. He's in his 80s. And one of the first books that he wrote as a writer was Askipara Yolu, The Road to Askipara. You know, in every family member of our Nasibov clan, we always have that book, collection of poems called The Road to Askipara. So like our identity was very, very, very tied to this area. And my mom, who's actually on this call, and she actually has roots from Karabakh, from Aghdamsha. When she married into that family, she says, I am from Kazakh. So she took on the identity of my father. So we were all very proud Askipara Kazakh people.
Thank you.
I'm only laughing because I live in the United States now, so it kind of seems a little funny, but that's just kind of how it was when I was growing up.
Thank you. Now the same question to Maria. So your part of your family is from Artsvashen, and how this identity plays a role in your life, and do you feel you are from there, and how does it work for you?
It's very hard to say because I kind of don't feel that I'm from there. Because maybe my mother and my aunts will feel that more. But like for me, I was like more, I I don't know, I was born in Abovyan and raised there, but also I have this weird feeling, and I started actually recently to explore this feeling when I was kind of I'm actually doing a photo story about Artsvashen at this moment, and I'm working on that project right now. That's why this is like very new for me, because I recently realized that I don't really have a sense of belonging to anywhere, and like kind of I can't really call myself that I'm from here, and I just realized that this is because of Artsvashen, I think. Because I was analyzing all this, my childhood and all the conversations we had when I was small, what was my grandmother telling and what was my grandfather telling. And yeah, I think I don't consider myself from there, but also I have this feeling of lost. Like I feel sometimes that I'm like lost and like I don't like kind of belong anywhere, and like I can't say I'm from here. Also, I can't say I'm like from Abovyan. You know what I'm saying? Like it's really complicated, and I think there is a lot of things to work with. Like, yeah.
Thank you to both of you. Now back to Seven.
Thank you. Uli, the enclaves have been in discussion lately due to new border agreements between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And how do you feel about these developments?
You know, it was actually a little hard for me at first. Not the developments, but people's reactions is what was hard for me. And some people in this Zoom call, they were kind of there when I was going through the motions. And first of all, the fate of the actual enclaves. So in my case, Yukhari Askipara, in Maria's case, Artsvashen, the fate of those hasn't been decided, and a lot of people thinking that they will be exchanged. Maybe we don't know. We don't know yet. The villages that went from Armenian control to Azerbaijani control were the other villages of Kazakh, one of which happens to be Yukhari Askipara, and happens to be a village that a lot of my family members are from on my maternal grandmother's side. And so I have a lot of childhood memories of a lot of relatives from that part of the family in the First Karabakh War being, I guess the correct terminology would be, they would be veterans of that war. They were in the village protecting it, fighting there. But also a lot of people who became IDPs, internally displaced people, which is, you know, you can't call someone a refugee when it's within the country. So that's the correct terminology for people who, you know, had to leave basically their homes. And reading the news recently was very difficult for me because of how uninformed people are. And you know, I understood logically that it didn't have to do with people. It had to do with one country that's in a weaker negotiating position, and another country that's in a stronger negotiating position. And the weaker country has to concede and give territories back to the other country without getting anything back. So I understood it logically, and I understood why people on the internet, specifically Armenians, why they were frustrated over it. You know, I understood. Like, it's not hard to understand that in a war, in a resolution, you know, things happen and people are not happy. You know, I watched the protests in the Tavush region. I watched like about that. What was that? There was like some church official, some guy in black robes blocking the road and everything. And for me personally, and you know, I'm 40 years old and I live in Los Angeles. I don't even live in Azerbaijan. For me, that was very difficult actually. And I was kind of surprised that being so removed, but also being someone who has done dialogues, who doesn't shy away from talking to Armenians and Azerbaijanis about the war, I was actually kind of surprised at myself how emotional it got me. I was actually a little angry. I was like, why are they protesting this? Like those villages were Azerbaijani populated, and people who left those villages left in the worst possible conditions. I mean, they were shot at, they were ethnically cleansed. Like there's tragedies there. I can tell you 5 stories from just my family of tragic events that will honestly make you cry. Like they're traumatic. They make me cry, and you know, I had a very emotional reaction. So it was hard for me. And then as I was getting ready for this Zoom meeting, I called my father's cousin, who was born and grew up in Yukhari Askipara. And I just wanted to ask him about the village because obviously I wasn't born there. And I said, can you just tell me about the everyday life? What was the village known for? What would you guys do? What kind of communications you have with neighboring Armenian village, Askipar? You know, and I could just sense the sadness in his voice. He said, you know, Shahi Askipara went back under Azerbaijani control. I'm happy, but I know that like Yukhari probably never will be. He was just, this is a man in his 80s, and he was sad. He was depressed. So, and again, I'm not a historian. I'm not a conflictologist. I don't want to make a bigger point, but you know, I really wish that before people go on Twitter and start like proclaiming, oh, this is fair or not fair, like they actually think about human lives that were affected by this. And the 90s war especially was kind of highlighted by how cruel it was. And both sides, you know, not just one side, both sides. There was a lot of cruelty, a lot of displacement. There were pogroms, there was ethnic cleansing, there were massacres. It was just a very bad period. And unfortunately, those Kazakh villages, even though they have nothing to do with actual Nagorno-Karabakh, they got entangled in the situation.
Thank you, Uli. Maria, the enclaves have been in discussion lately, so to a new border agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And how do you feel about these developments?
I would say that I agree with Uli, because I think this conversation, these discussions, they are like coming and going, and I mean, they were recently more active, but it's not like the first time when you hear this kind of discussions. And I don't know, I'm very, how to say, not really optimistic about this. It's like now that like when I hear, like I'm like, I don't really like trust the process. I don't really know what will happen. And like this is like a very strange period in Armenia. Like everyone are, I think, very confused, and like political conflicts, and like this is how to say, very how to say, larvat. Can someone translate? Like
Tense.
yeah, like tense, and like everyone is on edge, and like everyone is very aggressive, and like this is where I stopped like having any discussions, conversations with people, because every time I feel like there is no open space for discussion, and there is like wall, and like this aggression and like nationalistic tendencies are on a very high level at this moment for me. And I don't really know how I feel about this discussion, because I just don't trust like kind of anyone who are doing this kind of like discussion. So I don't really know. Also, like this is very weird topic, because people always discuss a lot of things without considering the people who actually have experienced that, and maybe give some space to people like who were from those villages, and maybe they can talk. And also this is very hypocritical, because when we think about like the past, like when when the people left their, like, for example, villages, how the government supported them, for example, you know, I don't there was like a really not that big amount of money that they, for example, the government gave to my family, and of course it couldn't like compensate the even like financial loss, you know. So the people, I think the people who experience that, I don't know how it's in Azerbaijan, but I don't think they never felt like that support from inside their country after losing their homes. So I don't really feel that it will be now, you know. Yeah.
Thank you, Maria. Now, I'll go back to Leila.
Thank you, Seve. So the next question will be addressed to Maria again. So Maria, you're about to publish an article about Artsvashen and this whole situation that's going on. Can you please tell us a bit about what caused you to write this article, and what do you want to communicate via this article?
So it's not an article, it's a photo story, and it's like multimedia story that I'm working at this moment right now, and it's like more personal photo story, and this is more about my personal journey through my childhood, and as I was telling before, like kind of exploration, like how this experience that my grandparents had, and then my mother had, like how kind of it affected me, and did it affect me, because for a long time in my life, like I didn't really think about it, and I didn't really think that it affected me. So now I'm trying to go back and realize how this trauma that they had, how it was present in my daily life when I was a kid, and how was it to growing up in this atmosphere of people who had this trauma, and how am I carrying this trauma, even though it's not my pain and it's not my loss. It doesn't. I didn't experience this, but somehow I'm carrying it, and how to work with it, and how to do what to do. So yeah, my photo story is mostly exploration of that feelings, and I'm working with archives of my family, and also I did new photos of them and me, and yeah, it's gonna be there's gonna be exhibition in Tbilisi that is organized by Kolga Tbilisi, and there is like people who are participating are from Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. So yeah, there will be an exhibition, and then they will be published in Chaykhana Media. But yeah, basically it's about these feelings, because when I first started to do this project, there was a lot of things that I realized about myself, and how this trauma affected me, because for example, I just realized that my family were always like very secretive and like very close, and they would be really scared when someone would knock the door. They would be really freaked out when someone will come. They wouldn't make like contact or like be friends with neighbors. They wouldn't have like very close friends. And like while growing up, when you live in this atmosphere, it's like it gives like kind of trace. And now I'm like slowly realizing how their trauma affected me, and I'm exploring this kind of a generational trauma in my photo story. Yes.
Thank you so much, Maria. Now for the next question, we are back to Seve.
Thank you, Leila. So Uli, you have mentioned that your father's and sister's last visit to Yukhari Askipara was a dramatic and painful event. Do you think this one last experience left a mark in your family's memory of the village?
Yeah, and again, I'm so sorry. I know it's very confusing, but my father took my two sisters. We were all in Gaza, like the central city. And you know, think of it as Gaza is kind of like the center of the region, and then there's the rayon, Gaza Rayono, and those villages are part of the rayon. So these villages would be like, you know, 10, 15, 20 minutes by car, maybe a little bit longer. But my father, who was very attached to his maternal and paternal villages, in 1990, actually decided to take my two older sisters, not me. I was only 6 years old and a child, probably more of a liability. But my sisters were a little bit older. He decided to take them to, actually it was Askipara. Going to Yuhari Askipara was already very difficult because the only road going to Yuhari would have been through the territory of Armenia, Soviet, well, it wasn't Soviet Republic. Well, 1990, yeah, it was still SSR, Soviet Socialist Republic. And the road to Yuhari from Ashahar through Askipar, you know, like, for example, we talk about memories. One of my memories, one of my mother's memories, actually, sorry, one of my sister's memories was that our grandfather, who's from Yuhari Askipara, used to always complain how the villagers always wanted to improve the road to connect Yuhari and Ashahar Askipara better. But the local government, because it went through Armenia, the local government, the regional government in Armenia was always making it, they basically wouldn't approve a motion to improve the road between, to improve the communication between the two villages. And the locals, and we're talking Soviet times, and the locals always took it as an intentional move by the government to kind of weaken the communication between the two villages, who throughout the history before the Soviet times were kind of one big village, so to speak. But by 1990, Yuhari Askipara, there were people there, like they were people fighting, partisans for all intents and purposes, because Azerbaijan was not a very strong country at that moment. But there were no residents in the village. However, there were still people living in Ashahar Askipara. And my father took my two sisters to visit his aunt, who was still living in the village. So my father's aunt was the last person, was one of the last internally displaced people to leave the village. So he took my sisters there, and I interviewed my sisters. And one of them, my middle sister, she has blocked a lot of those memories off. And she said, I had to do it because every time I think about it, it makes me very uncomfortable. And, you know, we've all moved on with our lives. I'm the youngest, I'm 40. They're in their mid to late 40s. You know, they have their lives. They're not thinking about what happened in 1990. My eldest sister, she said, you know, it's a very fuzzy feeling, but I remember constantly hearing people shooting. And I remember visiting houses that were empty and feeling bad for chickens. There were a lot of homeless chickens running around because people would get up and leave and just leave everything. The houses had all of the furniture still inside, and there were just chickens running everywhere. So she said we played with chickens, and we would go, and you know, there were trees just full of fruit. That area was known for two things: honey making and fruits. According to my father's cousin, I want to include a funny moment because this is kind of a depressing conversation. When I was interviewing my father's cousin from Yuhari Askipara, I said, what was Yuhari Askipara known for? And he, you know, listed everything. And in the end, he said, Zohal arahı, the best Zohal arahı in all of Azerbaijan came from Yukhari Askipara. Zohal is like a cherry, and arah is like vodka or brandy. So according to my father's cousin, the best cherry brandy from all of Azerbaijan came from Yukhari Askipara. So anyways, that gives you an idea of, you know, the villages. So, but I thought that was funny. Again, so they went to the village, and then they had to leave because you know, it was one of those places where during the day there was more or less peaceful, but at night that's when the fighting would intensify. So I tried to fact check everything, so I'm not making things up for you guys, so don't quote me on it, but there is, my mom thinks they stayed overnight. For her, everything is fuzzy because she was crying, screaming. She was very nervous about the safety of her daughters. You know, it maybe wasn't the best parenting decision to take your two daughters to a village where there's an active fighting. But you know, my father unfortunately has passed, so he's not around for me to ask him why he did that. Certainly a very emotional decision. But you know, their memories were the villages were already either empty or emptying out, and there were a lot of chickens running around, and they could hear constant gunfire. My father's cousin was the head of the local kind of troops, the defense troops. So he kind of shielded them. But they came back, and shortly thereafter, I think the final year that if you look up the history of those villages, for Yukhari Askipara, the final year doesn't even exist. Like, when did it come under Armenian control? I tried to see it. Some sources said 1990, some said 91, 92. The same for Yukhari Askipara, because it was a trickle effect. It wasn't like, oh, everyone got up and left. It was, you know, some villagers really held on for as long as they could. And one of them was my father's aunt, Navad Nene. She would be in phone conversation with my mom. Not everyone had a phone, but there was one place in the village that had a phone, and she would call my mom. And the story she told my mom that my mother told me throughout my life, not just recently, was that she said Navad Nene, she had a beautiful house in Yukhari Askipara. It was born in the 90s, brand new. And the story she told is like, hey, Ella, don't worry. Like, I always bake bread and I always make extra. And then I take my extra bread to my Armenian neighbors. And I always do that. And I ask them to protect my house. Again, when they were leaving, she thought, oh, we're just going to leave. And then we're going to go back a couple of months later. So her whole thing was, don't worry, Ella, when I bake bread, I make extra. And then I give it to my Armenian neighbors and they'll take care of my stuff, don't worry. So that's another story that I heard. But yes, my sisters got to experience firsthand some of the fighting, or they heard it, excuse me. And when they came back, I know that one of them doesn't like talking about it, and the other one has talked about it, but in a sense of that, like, it was a very depressing sight. An empty village, empty houses, chickens, animals run around, trees bursting with fruit, but nobody to collect them, and then constant shooting.
Thank you, Uli. And next question, we go back to Leila.
Thank you. So this question is to both of you, but to start with Maria. So you have relatives from the Artsvashen, and do you know how they feel about the current ongoing situation? And how do you think, you already mentioned this generational trauma, and how do you think this affects them in this process?
So the only relatives I have is just like at this moment is my grandmother. My grandfather has passed away like 10 years ago. And there is just like my grandmother, and she's like 90 years old, and she doesn't feel that well these days. I mean, she's okay, but like not like how to say, her mind is not that clear. And also, yeah, there is my mom and aunts and my uncle, but we don't have any other close relatives. But I don't know, like there is always this conversation that I hear sometimes that they are like, I don't know, it's mostly just sad and like nostalgic like discussions, but none of them has like really any how to say like they don't really know what they will do or what they will do, you know, like I mean, I've heard that my uncle was saying that if there will be a possibility to go back and if there will be like possibility to live there, he will definitely go. But that's the only thing that I've heard, so I don't really know like what to say. But I wanted to say something about the chickens. I don't know it. I just remembered it just sounded funny also and sad, but I just remembered that my grandfather used to tell that when they told him to leave, the first thing he did was that to give food to chickens for 3 days. And yeah, this was like the chicken storyline is like everywhere. Yeah.
Thank you, Maria. Now the same question to Uli again. So you have relatives from the villages, as you mentioned already. So do you know how they feel about this current developments, and how do you think this affects the generational trauma?
That's an interesting question, and I probably don't have a full answer. But when I was talking to my relatives and interviewing them, I observed two things. If they had some kind of a traumatic experience with the fall of the villages, then their position was very stern. And if somebody had less of a traumatic experience, their position was a little more flexible, like, yeah, of course we can coexist, it's okay. And then relatives who had somebody die, or I have one relative who's we're very close with their family. It's my father's cousin again, and his father, so my father's uncle, was taken. He was a shepherd, so he wasn't like a fighter, but he was taken I don't even know what the correct term is, hostage, I guess, for ransom. And I actually talked to him yesterday, and I asked him about his memories, and the story of his father came up. And the story he told me was, it was very difficult for him. He was very emotional. I actually regretted asking him because I know that I reminded him of something very, very hard. And the story he told me was, you know, his father was just a simple shepherd, and he was, you know, out was the sheep or whatever he was shepherding at the moment, at that moment. And he was taken hostage, and the Armenian side had a certain ransom in mind, so they demanded ransom. But they kept his father for 40 days. And during the 40 days, he went through just terrible torture. He was kept in a barrel, in an empty barrel. And, you know, he was tortured in awful ways, to a point where when their father was back, he had lost half of his body weight. And then he had chronic illnesses for the rest of his life. And he lived a long life because his sons tried to take care of him. And by long, like relatively long, maybe like 10 years at most. But he died in his early 60s because of all the chronic illnesses resulting from being starved and tortured, basically kept in a barrel, empty barrel, for 40 days. So, and then on that same family had 3 people that died in the fighting. There's a famous woman, her name is Garatel from Yukhari Askipara. That's also a relative, actually. There's actually a poem about Garatel. She was a woman. She had she had a weapon, and she was protecting the village. And when it became clear that the village was not gonna withstand the incoming forces, she committed suicide. So when I talk to that side of the family, you can only imagine how difficult it is for them. And for me to float the idea of coexistence, it's almost like, in that context, it almost sounds a little disrespectful. Like they're not done healing, they're not done processing. For them, it's like, what do you mean coexistence? Like, what are you talking about? And then the other side of the family that were born in Yuhari Askipara, but they didn't leave right at the last moment. Maybe they left a little bit earlier. They were studying in Baku and everything. So they didn't have that like tragic exit. When I talked to them about coexistence, they're like, yeah, maybe, why not? But what I've learned is that there is no mechanism, especially in our culture, in the Caucasus, for people to heal. Like, people don't do therapy, people don't talk about these things. And, I have been searching for interviews on Azerbaijani media with people from, for example, Askipara, either one. I don't see anyone, like, I don't see people speaking for themselves. I don't see people saying, this is my story, and having the space and the freedom to talk about it. What I do see is the official statements, the official statement this and the official, it's almost like we are dehumanized. Our stories are not heard because everything is so centralized. You know what I'm talking about? Like, it's I don't see regular people saying, like, this is what happened to me, this is how I feel about it. It's all very controlled, very, very centralized. So my thinking, my American outsider thinking of someone who has family from there, has talked to them, and I've tried to kind of analyze the information they've given me in my American way, is that border delimitation is good for peace. We need to delimit the border. And not only that, we need to have some kind of strong mechanisms in place where if there is some kind of a little quarrel, oh, he took my cow, I was out shepherding and they stole a cow. Like, those little quarrels need to be addressed immediately, because little quarrel festers. In Gaza, what I heard in the Askipara villages, there were quarrels. For example, the Yuhari Askipara people were not happy that Armenian SSR would not allow to build a road to connect the two villages. So think about it in the context of Soviet Union, decades of people just having those grievances. They're mad. And then Nagorno-Karabakh over there, there's a war that has nothing to do with these guys. But those quarrels, they come to the surface and it's a spark, and then they start fighting. You know what I mean? So, like, there has to be mechanisms where people have to have a space to discuss those things, a space to have resolutions, but also like kind of like truth and reconciliation committee, almost like the ones that we saw in South Africa. Like, our people need space to heal, and our cultures, and maybe I shouldn't speak for the Armenian culture, I'll speak for Azerbaijani culture. I don't think there are mechanisms in our culture for people to get their feelings and their, process their feelings in a safe space where they can get over it. And then in the end, talk about coexistence, so that when I mention it, an American from Los Angeles, they don't look at me and say, what are you talking about? What coexistence are you talking about? Like, it's almost like I am disrespecting their memories. So it was also a very interesting place for me. I would interview these people, and then in the end, I would ask that question, and there was like this silence. I was like, "What are you talking about? Like, why are you bringing your American thinking to me? Like, I just told you about something I haven't talked about in 30 years, stuff like that." So that was kind of my takeaway, and I hope that people. My goal in telling you guys all of this, and some parts are very uncomfortable and very difficult, honestly, for me to talk about, is for people to understand that none of this is black and white. There's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of little details. And I really hope that if there is some kind of a comprehensive peace deal or whatever it ends up being, there is some kind of a mechanism on community level for people to address their grievances. Otherwise, if there is an imposed peace like we had in Soviet Union, oh, friendship of the nations, get along, figure it out. Maybe there will be another little, another little like spark that will blow up into something bigger. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Uli. Thank you to both of you. Now for the concluding question, we are back to you, Seven.
Maria, how do you imagine peaceful coexistence in the Azerbaijan-Armenia border regions? And when or how do you think this could become a reality?
Honestly, it's very hard question. And I think Uli also reflected to this question in some ways. I think it's very also subjective and also depends on the context. For me personally, even though I have this experience of my family members losing their home and going through a traumatic experience, I mean, I've never lost any close person to me during war, and I've never lived near the border. So I live in the capital. So I think my experience is very different from an experience of a person who lives, for example, near the border. So thinking about coexistence, it's like very, at this moment, very utopistic for me. But this is, I don't know, this is a very sad topic to me because every time when I meet people from Azerbaijan and we talk about war, or like I meet friends and we discuss a lot of topics, and there is always this discussion how similar we are and how many things we have in common, how amazing connections we are making to each other, and how great it would be if we could coexist. But every time there is like this I don't know, sad end of the conversation because we don't know how it's possible. And I can't really say. For me personally, it's like a dream, and I really like it to happen. But like also, I can't speak, as Uli said, like there are people who didn't heal and like people who have different kind of experience. So for me, coexistence sounds great and like sounds amazing, and I dream about it. But on the other hand, I don't think that majority of Armenians, for example, are ready, you know. Yeah.
Thank you, Maria. Uli, you already discussed some of the parts of this question, but maybe you have something to add, like when or how do you think this could become a reality?
I think it has to be a very structured, very honest process. And right now, it's not me and Maria, figuring this out. I'm sure me and Maria can figure it out. But it's done on a high level. These intense negotiations behind doors. I just really hope that whatever peace deal that gets signed, there are very strong mechanisms in place for people to basically in the beginning. It has to be very structured. The grievances, if we are to coexist on the border communities, there needs to be very strong rules and laws, like so people cannot cheat each other or something. Like I'm just kind of thinking a worst case scenario in my head. Like, why would two people who have coexisted for hundreds of years would suddenly start fighting each other? And maybe there were grievances that were not addressed for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, and they kind of fester inside and come out. So how do you prevent that? You prevent that by having spaces, having community meetings, having conferences that are not surface level, but they go deeper, they go below surface. Is that even possible in the context of the Caucasus and our two proud nations, where people are very proud and they don't like talking about pain and everything? I don't know. So the way I see it, if there is proper coexistence, it will have to be in the context of several generations later, where the generations that were affected by the war are physically gone, and the newer generations are far removed from the trauma, and they just want to get along because we're people. So that's one context where I see it, maybe in 100 years. But if we want something to happen in our lifetime, a coexistence to happen sooner than 100 years, sooner than several generations cycling through, then the way I would see it would be a very structured, very kind of a top-down approach where there's strong leadership. One of the things that I got from talking to my family members, it was that whenever there was some kind of a dispute in the village, it had to go through central government, the central government, not even Baku, sometimes Moscow. So imagine you have a village level grievance and you have to go all the way to Moscow for somebody to solve it. That means it's not going to get solved, and it's not an unsolved grievances. Now we know what they lead to. So I think there have to be very strong checks and balances, and not strong where like, shut up, don't talk about it. Strong where, again, there's procedures, there's checks and balances, but there's also space for people to air their grievances. They have to air their grievances. If the government says, don't talk about it, suck it up and move on, you're just a stupid villager, it's not going to work. But if the government or governments, I should say, come down to the village level and say, this is what's happening. Like I saw Nicole Pashinyan go to Tavush, and he had like a cutout, and he was on the villagers level saying, this is what's happening. He was explaining it, and to me that actually blew my mind. I was like, wow, like that is what is needed. The villagers need to be talked to directly, and that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Thank you, Uli. So this was our last prepared questions, and I will go to Arnold for the Q&A segment.
Thank you, Sebe. And thank you so much to Maria and Uli. So many interesting and often tragic stories about these border areas, these enclaves or exclaves. So for our next segment, please, if you have any questions, directly message them to me, or if you want to speak up yourself, please let me know, raise your hand, or you can just unmute yourself. So far, I don't have any questions sent to me privately, so anyone who is joining the Zoom has any questions to ask.
Arnold, I don't know if you see Aram has raised his hand.
There it is. Aram, apologies.
Yeah, first and foremost, I would like to thank you both. Can everybody hear me properly? My connection is not the best.
Yes, we hear you.
Oh, great. Yeah, that's why I don't have my camera on. I would like to thank both of you for your stories. Insanely tragic, honestly, and it's something that like I've also like really like looked at and analyzed myself, because I was looking at the histories of these exclaves and enclaves like in the past few weeks. I guess my question is, because both of you kind of like touched upon the issue of trauma. And Uli also mentioned that a lot of the times you don't hear the stories of the people themselves who were affected by this horrible war, but rather the government statements that kind of use it for like sometimes or most of the time for propaganda purposes. And like this was also the case in case of like, you know, other larger massacres that happened. So to me, I guess my question is for both of you, is there a possibility to somehow kind of center the voices of the people who actually suffered from this, instead of just like giving them like weird financial compensations that don't work, that don't really cover anything, but like actually like center the voices, kind of like share the history that existed? Is there a possibility to use that shared history in the context of reconciliation, instead of like having like just propaganda statements from one side or the other?
I can start if that's okay with Maria. So in some weird way, Aram, yes, our shared pain can be a way for us to get close to each other. And I've talked about it a lot, and I talked about it to my family. I have a very unique perspective of being an Azerbaijani in Los Angeles. And before I lived in Los Angeles, or America for that matter, I did not understand the Armenian history or the Armenian perspective as well as I do now. And, you know, I'm not saying you have to excuse people who hurt you because they were hurt. No, that doesn't work. You know, but when you understand that, you know, some people are evil and they hurt others because they just have some, I don't know, evil tendencies. Again, this is just my perspective. Americanized Uli from Askipara perspective. But but some people hurt because they were hurt, or they want to revenge something, or I don't know. So the motivation could be like in their heart of hearts, they're like, oh, this is how I restore justice. So I think instead of kind of taking the revenge route, if people had the space to talk about what motivates them, and if you were to explain to people, listen, instead of taking up arms and restoring justice that way, you can also just hear the other side's pain, and then, you know, we can empathize with each other. And that's why I love these dialogue programs so much, because whenever you put Azerbaijanis and Armenians in the same room, you know, and you start hearing stories, the stories are mirror images of each other. And a lot of people get angry at first. You know, when you're a victim, you want to hold on to being a victim. You want to think you're the only victim in the world, but the life doesn't work that way. You know, when you put people from two different sides in a room with proper moderation, it has to be moderated, because hurt people can still hurt others. There can be a transformation. There can be a transformation from, oh my God, I was hurt and I was mad at this person, but they were hurt too, and they're mad at me. Why are we mad at each other? To put it in very plain terms. And I know I'm simplifying it a little bit, but Aram, I think that, you know, the way our pain has been weaponized against us is an injustice to the conflict, because our pain is being used to further the conflict as opposed to being used to bring the people together and say, you know, terrible things have happened on both sides.
Maria, did you want to say something on Aram's question?
Yes, I wanted to say that I very much agree with Uli about that in some weird way, like sharing these stories and like this pain is kind of the place and point where we connect. And I also think that giving more like space and like I don't know, to people who have experienced this kind of things and like a space to share and like make, I don't know, become more visible. And I when I say space, it doesn't have to be like physical space. And because as you said, our pain was really weaponized, like for years, for propaganda reasons and like for other reasons. The government used our pain and never gave us space, and we were never heard, and like other perspectives, like alternative voices, or like people who would disagree like with a lot of things, they were never heard. And like this dehumanization of each others went for years and years, and actually people who really experienced these were never like heard. And like yeah, and I totally agree with everything you said, and thank you very much, Aram, also for your question.
Thank you. Thank you, Aram, for the question and the very interesting perspectives Maria and Uli shared. Anyone in the group has any questions here? The live audience? I do have one question I want to ask Maria. So you said you've been collecting photos of Artsvashen and maybe some information, and I was wondering if there is something particularly interesting, a landmark, a story, sort of folk tale about Artsvashen that your grandparents talked about. That's something interesting about that area, the village.
There is not specific story. I'm just kind of going to archives and like finding like photos that interest me from Artsvashen, and like I'm making handmade collages with that photos, and like photos that I'm doing in present of me and like my family members. But I guess the interesting part for me was the thing that I found, like video footage actually, that there was some video that there is like this famous Armenian person, Aramai Sahagan. I don't know if you know him. So basically, he's also from Artsvashen, and when he was working in Armenian public television channel, there was some program that they went to Artsvashen. I think it was on 1990 or maybe 1991, and they did this like journalistic video, and it was the road, and then there were like people, there was some concert. And I guess the most interesting part for me when I found that video, and because like Aramai Sahagan was like working in the TV, they gave him the disc, and then Aramai Sahagan like gave it to people who were from Artsvashen, and like now everyone had that disc. Yeah, that was really interesting for me to find. Yeah.
Yeah, I connect in a way that, my relatives, including, my three of my grandparents came from central Iran in these rural Armenian villages, and there's so many interesting things about daily life and everything else, beliefs, and all of these are being forgotten. And for example, I started interviewing some relatives, some people I know from the region, because it's gonna be gone forever. I know, and it's like I have this sort of urge to try to preserve at least something that I can. Thank you, Maria. So let's see. Anyone else in the live audience wants to ask something from our guests? I don't really have anything sent to me. As DM, Diego, you want to share some words? I guess we can start closing it up. Okay,
Yeah, I just
everyone.
want to thank you as well for very, very interesting and necessary meeting, I think, as well, because as I was talking to Uli earlier, we never hear about the voices from these villages, and at least not in the English language for sure. And so I think that this is very valuable material for other people to see new perspectives and see the conflict in a different angle.
All right, I want to thank everyone who joined us live. This meeting is, give me 1 second. Okay, it's just a thank you note. This meeting was recorded and will be available on YouTube for you to view. And we have different contents on posted on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. Follow our social media, and we hope to see you all for the next meeting. And another thanks to Uli and Maria for joining. It was a very fascinating and sometimes hard to sort of follow with the tragic stories, actually. And this is very important. We need to have these discussions, as Diego said. Thank you, everyone, and hope to see you all next time. Cheers.